sleeper must awake.
All right, second show of 2024, first interview of 2024. On this 9th episode of Hopscotch Chronicles, I am your host, Dominique Vallée. Happy that we're together once again for a great episode. I'm excited for that one. I was excited before we recorded it, and now it's recorded and I'm still excited. So yeah, this week we're talking psychology and self-knowledge and all that cool stuff with Dr. Paul J. Leslie. So yeah, I'm still getting used to the mic. Thank you for for still being here, for keeping up with me as I learn the trade. Oh, by the way, yeah, if you're not willing to listen to me ramble in these intros, which I understand, if you look in the comments or show notes or whatever, like timestamps also, whether it's on YouTube or your podcast app, you should see an interview beginning timestamp. So if you want to skip there, I'll try to make it even more obvious, because yeah, sometimes you come here, you just want to hear the guest. You don't want to hear my big fluffy face, and I understand that. I have no issues with that. So yeah, last week's show was something a bit special that I'm not gonna do so much, but from time to time I'm gonna do a solo episode, just like I did last week. That one was on a very personal matter, but also very important at large, because it addresses the connection between spirituality and art, which for me is, I mean, one goes with the other. There's there isn't really one without the other. I understand that's not the case for everyone, but yeah, so I was talking about my experience going through a grunge phase earlier in life, and how it affected me. So yeah, check that out if you want. But what I want to say about that is that expect more interviews with artists. This is something that I want to do a bit different from other shows, is that well, when you have a show about mysticism, spirituality, philosophy, you usually have just people in those fields. But as I said, I think art is so important for one's spiritual development that it only makes sense that I would try to have those discussions with musicians and maybe visual artists also. And it feels like they're not, like, artists are not often asked like deeper questions about their spirituality. So I'm always wondering, like, are they reticent to talk about it, or is it just that, like, it's not a very popular subject, so the questions just don't get asked? So yeah, I'm gonna try to get some some influential and just general good artists that clearly have this kind of a spiritual, or maybe even some esoteric inclinations. So anyways, look out for that. Don't be surprised if you see a bunch of musicians between all the philosophers and the PhDs, and anyways, so you get the drift. But for this episode, we're diving into psychology. Because it feels sometimes that maybe it's more of a Western thing. I don't know. Sometimes our psychological aspects get kind of left aside, or when we're really, really into a spiritual path, if you may, it's not taken that seriously. It's taken more on just a emotional level, on a very surface level. But to really, really deep delve into our psychology, even on an intellectual way, can help some of us, because we're all built on different sets of archetypes, to go further. And that's the case for me. That said, if it's only like an intellectual and mental thing, it has its limits. And that's why I think Dr. Leslie is just the perfect person to talk to when it comes to psychology for the mystics, although I don't think he works in that way and wouldn't limit himself to to have a mystic clientele. But his open-mindedness, and also the importance he puts on creativity within the therapeutical process. For me, as a person who's seen a lot of therapists in life of all kinds, I think this creativity aspect and adaptability aspect that Paul definitely has, it's mandatory to make true progress in psychologically on our path. So anyways, I'm not gonna get into the details of how we met, but it was very quick. It was a short time, but instantly I felt like I'm gonna have fun talking with this guy for sure. Well, I didn't know if he would want to come on the show, but I knew that just on a personal level, like I was sure we'd get along well. So, and I think I was right. It feels like we had that connection, and it was a fun, engaging, and inspiring talk. So let me read his impressive bio. So Dr. Paul J. Leslie is a psychotherapist, researcher, trainer, and author in Aiken, South Carolina. Paul has a doctorate in counseling psychology as a national board certified fellow in hypnotherapy, and is presently the coordinator of the psychology program at Aiken Technical College. He has authored 9 books on such topics as transformative psychotherapy, healing, and personal development. Paul is a popular trainer in the areas of solution-based therapies, Ericksonian hypnosis, and creative therapy applications. Here's that word again, creativity. All right, so that's it. Let's move on with the interview. I'll remind you to like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and if you're on audio, any kind of audio podcast application, you can also subscribe and leave comments and leave reviews. It really helps. And if you want to help me do more of these shows and get better at it, please engage, leave your comments, and all the good stuff. All right, so here we go with the interview. Dr. Paul J. Leslie, thank you so much for being here. We've met in unusual circumstances in I'm not going to go into details, but on a online New Year's party. And I was so glad to have this occasion to speak with you and like just connect through this. And so here we are. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you, and thank you for asking me to do this interview. I've been looking forward to it.
Cool. Yeah, as we were saying before we started recording, it's going to be, I don't know how unusual it's going to be for you, but from what I've seen of interviews that you've done in the past, like it's kind of the client interviewing the therapist, because I've been seeing many therapists towards the course of my life from a very young age. As I said, some unfortunate encounters, and one that were very, very important for me. So we're gonna get in that, like all this psychotherapy stuff, but we're gonna push it a bit. And as it's going to be fun, no worries, anyone, and you. So I don't know if you've seen the past episodes or just glanced at them, but I've interviewed magicians, and I've asked them what kind of magicians that they are, Mm-hmm. So I guess a good way to start would be to ask you what kind of what kind of therapist you are. I've seen you mention Ericksonian therapy, which I don't know. As much experience I've had in therapy, I've never heard of that before. So yeah. What kind of psychotherapist are you?
Hopefully an effective one. I would say my goal as a therapist, the kind of therapist I am, is to be what the person in front of me needs me to be in that moment. And that will change depending on the person who's in front of me. Some people need encouragement. Some people need confrontation. Some people need support. Some people need laughter. Some people need attachment. Some people need detachment. I mean, it just kind of goes down to what is that person needing? What resource, access to some inner strength, and how do I facilitate them accessing that? And it could take the form of whatever ethical action needs to happen in the moment. It could be very subtle things, as in just sitting and being present and telling them, I'm so sorry to hear that you've gone through this. Or it could be something very active, creative, to where we're doing certain tasks, doing certain therapeutic rituals. In some times I've had a client dance. I've had scavenger hunts in the office. I've had all kinds of different things, whatever's needed to create the conditions for change to emerge, because everyone has the ability to transform their life on some level. And my goal is not so much to be you use the term magician, to be the magician that creates this, but to facilitate for this change to come about. Because in the end, it's the client who's the one who's changing themselves. And I think any good magician, I'm assuming you're meaning like the occult magicians rather than the David Copperfield, David Blaine magicians. Any good, more occult magician will talk about also how self-change is an important part of their process. So to answer your question, that's what I try to be, an informed, a caring, a compassionate, but ultimately I strive to be a creative therapist.
I wish I met you when I was 12. No, I'm kidding. Kind of. But the way you're speaking, and just how you didn't necessarily describe yourself using just a specific school of thought, to me is already very inspiring. And I hope to see more and more therapists, psychotherapists are going to be needed more and more in the next few years, I believe, who have this ability to be creative. And just as an aside, because we've exchanged a bunch of emails, and you were mentioning that you've done a lot of martial arts, and I see kind of a relation there, like just adapting to the flow of energy that's there, responding to the situation accordingly to either empower or anyways, you know where I'm going. Right. There's already so much where we could go. Is it a good idea to quickly mention Ericksonian therapy?
Oh, sure.
Or is it very like at the center of your practice enough to put a point on it?
Well, sure. Yeah. Ericksonian therapy is a therapy concept, if you will, modeled after the late American psychiatrist and medical hypnotist Milton H. Erickson. Erickson was a wild thinker. Some people have even thought he was like an American shaman, in that he would create these incredible shifts in people in the most odd, unexpected, and paradoxical ways. Erickson, and early in his life, when he was about 17, 18 years old, he contracted polio, which just devastated his body. But he found that he had the ability to use his imagination and his creativity to essentially heal himself well enough to finish school, go to college, become a medical doctor. And while he was in college, he studied clinical hypnosis. And what he found was that many ideas he had about how people change really could be created even more effectively utilizing hypnosis. But what Erickson did, which was different than other hypnotists or hypnotherapists, is that he took a different approach, in that he never was directive. And what I mean is, a lot of the old hypnotists would come to someone and says, "You're feeling very sleepy. Your eyes are getting very heavy. Mm-hmm. You will be doing this thing that I'm telling you to do." So it was almost like an authoritarian state, which is one reason why a lot of the early hypnosis research, there's a lot of hit and miss. Some people were very susceptible, who were more open to someone telling them what to do, whereas others might not have been. Where Erickson found that just by talking to people in an indirect manner, he could create shifts in the way they saw themselves, they saw their situations. He could help get them to do certain actions that would interrupt problematic patterns of behavior they had. And it was a way that was much more inclusive, in that it didn't take a dictator role in the relationship. Whereas a traditional hypnotist would say, you'll notice your eyes are becoming very heavy. So they're stating as a fact, this is what you'll notice. Whereas Erickson would say, you may notice your eyes are heavy or not. Either way is fine, because they're your eyes, and they can close as quickly or as slowly as you want them to close. Now, it's a whole different approach, meaning that we're going to take in the bulk of that person's experience. Maybe their eyes are heavy, maybe their eyes aren't. And that's okay, because whatever they're giving the therapist or the hypnotist, that person's going to utilize. That's a big thing from Erickson, was utilizing what patients and clients give you, rather than trying to force them into some kind of predetermined way of being in the world. So we kind of look at this as a very strategic way of working, and that Erickson devised strategies on how to, rather than be headbutting and forcing and trying to win, he would use whatever the client is doing and get them to do something just slightly different that would activate their own inner healing, which would then create shifts for them in their daily lives. Sometimes the things he's done, when you read some of the cases, are pretty out there, pretty strange, and they might not make sense initially. But then when you realize that he was trying to create a new way of experience for the client. Because what we found, I think, now is that people sometimes think that therapy or good therapy is about information, meaning, oh, here's your problem. Let me tell you where your problem came from and what your problem is. But what we found is any real, to me, generative change has to utilize the idea of an experience. An experience will create so much more profound change than insight or information. I can give you all the reasons why you shouldn't touch a hot stove. It only takes you one time to touch a hot stove to figure it out that, we don't have to have this conversation again, So I think that's it. The creation of new experiences, of different experiences. And going back to kind of what you asked me earlier, what kind of therapist am I? Maybe that's part of creating an experience that person needs in the moment to help them kind of find their own way, and whatever that way is. Mm-hmm. So yes, Ericksonian is a big bulk of how I work, but I don't want to be tied to it, because in the end, it's just a name, another concept and there are many wonderful concepts that work really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love it. Because it seems to me like from an evolutional or even a spiritual or just conscious evolution standpoint, it's not so straightforward. Like, I should be something very specific and stop being this, because for me, my experience tells me that all those crappy things that I've gone through, that if someone would ask me, like, do you want to do that? I would say, well, no, it's not going to be fun, But all that to say that this creative mindset allows maybe a truer, is that a word?
What is today?
A more actual evolution. It is. I love it. It allows a more natural evolution in the person, because without controlling it too much in a mental way, it allows something natural to come out. And I guess I've heard you mention in the intuition and creativity a lot in your interviews and in your books. Mm-hmm. And this gives the opportunity for, like, I'm going to call it divine randomness or natural randomness to do its work rather than just controlling it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Yeah. Have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's like the great philosopher Mike Tyson is often quoted by saying that everybody's got a plan until they get hit. And, it's a funny saying, but it's absolutely true. If I plan to interact in a certain specific way, there's also a high likelihood that won't happen. So if I say, if I say I have a client who I think will benefit from this type of technique, and then I try to force that technique and keep forcing it even if it's not working, well, it's real easy for me to say, well, it's just the client's being resistant, or, they just haven't gotten the message yet, rather than realizing that sometimes that technique might not work with that person, because I've gotten so married to a plan that I don't know when to throw away that plan and come up with a new plan. And I keep kind of, as the metaphor, beating a dead horse, keep hoping it's going to get up and run. And I think when we, just in general, when we try to structure too much of our daily interactions with people with so much rigid outcomes, we're always going to be incredibly disappointed. I remember I read somewhere someone said something about disappointment is the result of adequate planning, meaning that the more you plan for a specific thing that always just this way, oftentimes life will surprise you. There is an element of interacting with people, particularly whether you're a therapist, whether you're a coach, whether you're a healer, whether you're a teacher, that if you don't open up the possibility of kind of a free flow of information, that sometimes will go on a certain direction, start drifting, that sometimes those drifts, those changes in direction open new doorways to new experiences, which will go back to what I said earlier. If we're so rigid trying to create experience A, and yet we're going to experience B and C, how do we know that B and C and D and E aren't going to be beneficial? There's something in Western culture, and I'm overgeneralizing here, that we just want to just control the heck out of everything. We want to control our social interactions, we want to control our governments, we want to control people, our family members, and it's all based on this idea of kind of a rigid control. And I don't mean that means not having good boundaries. I think good boundaries and structure are essential to any system. But then when the system has a slight shift, if the parameters of that system are so rigid, immediate chaos will ensue. And instead of having that flexibility to kind of guide and move, much like the willow tree, when the wind, they have the ability to flow, we will become rigid with our family, rigid with our clients, our patients, our coworkers, our life in general. So yes, intuition, allowing what you are feeling to emerge. If you feel it strong enough to kind of allow it in a ethical, cooperative, creative way in a therapy setting, but just in general, accessing that idea of not knowing, but yet having an inner knowing about not knowing. It's a bit of a paradox. But when we free up that space to allow things to emerge, even if we're not so sure what they are, we certainly open the door to more creative responses. We open up the door to more shifts in context of how we view situations. And most importantly, we open up the door to the mysterious. And the mysterious is often where new ideas come from. I remember reading someone who said that most of psychotherapy and coaching and things like that is fairly boring because so many people are spending time only working in parameters in which there's no mystery. It's trying to stick to, things they know. Now, some things you want, if I go to my doctor with a broken arm and she or he's, I know we've always tried it this way and it's worked, so let's just try something different. Maybe I need them to stick to what works with a broken arm, right? But with a conversational consciousness, awareness shifting, too much rigidity will often stunt any type of, in my opinion, psychological growth, self-actualization process, all those kind of things. So the more that I have, here's the paradox, have a base and a structure, but allow myself some room to flow, then the more effective I can be, not just in my daily work or whatever I'm doing, but just in life in general. If I'm an artist and I see something so firmly in my head, like I'm painting a portrait of someone, I get it. It has to be a good painting, it has to look like that person, okay? But then Picasso created a whole world based on nothing looking like the person, and it was magical. It was, this is where the trick lies. Where do you go with those kind of paradigms and parameters?
I don't know if you know, but I've written a book published earlier this year, and it's about what I've called the mystical path of self-knowledge. And when I say mystical, I don't mean occult. That's very different. And so far, what you've told me is very mystical because it has to do with embracing the unknown, basically. And the more unknown we embrace, the more remains. But anyways, that's another another topic. But I'm interested in, and it's paradoxical in a way, because self-knowledge, to me, true self-knowledge really appears in that setting when we're completely open to not knowing. So I'm wondering how, and I'm guessing you're gonna answer it's different for every therapist, but what place does self-knowledge has in psychotherapy? And it seems obvious, like, for sure, I'm going to therapy to know myself better, but it's not that obvious, because some will have some therapists have kind of a more of a medicinal approach, medicine as in allopathic medicine, as if I go to take your example of, if I have a broken arm, like, they're not going to tell me, your arm works that way and this is how like, it's not, or encourage me to experiment with my arm, to know it. So it starts from the basis that they know better what my body is than me, which is, in some ways, it's true for sure. I'm not denying that. But in therapy, in the psychotherapy, like, how does that work exactly? And if there is a place for self-knowledge in therapy, I hope that might be a doozy. Okay.
No, totally fine. The idea of a medicalized view of therapy has been around for many years, and what I think that has ruined us in some ways, because we have become now slaves to diagnostic criteria and only specific ways of interacting on that. So years ago, when we were trying to, the field was trying to get therapy covered by insurance. Well, now there's a shift to, we have to be more like medicine, and because that's insurance is health care. So this is health care and all that. And I think the intentions were good there. But you kind of, make a deal with the devil with a lot of insurance companies, is now you got to diagnose people and you have to treat them according to this diagnosis. And I'm not saying that can't be effective. You can only see them a certain amount of time. You can only do certain things. And looking at people not as an alive system within systems, but as like a linear individual. Oh, you have anxiety, so anxiety is this, so we're just going to do that, So it's a very limited problem A gets solution A, kind of things. Doesn't mean that it can't be effective. But a lot of times what this has done is to eradicate the push for self-knowledge based on the part of the therapist, on the client. When I think about therapy, I asserted in one of my books that essentially that therapy is based on the construction of themes between the client and the therapist. So if you have depression, metaphorically, you have depression and you go to a therapist and you tell the therapist, I have depression. So if the therapist accepts that definition, that theme of Dominic is depressed, that doesn't mean that's a bad thing. But now you're creating a context in which you both have to interact. So if somebody's depressed, what do most of the time we do? We try to do things that counteract the depression. Now, if somebody comes in like yourself and says, I'm depressed, and within 10 minutes, the therapist goes, hey, wait, I don't think you're depressed. I think you're going through the artist's journey. Because you may notice when you're really creative, sometimes you get really excited and all that. And when you're in a place where you're not able to be creative, sometimes it can feel like this depression. So maybe it's just that you don't have enough creativity. You're not working on a project. You're not interacting with people who are creative. Now, that kind of way of thinking about it can work in either scenario, but the rigid frame of client is depressed is different than going through the artist journey, the struggle of the artist. It takes on a more, if dare I say, a mythic theme, like the hero's journey of Campbell and people like that. So you don't usually look up the diagnostic and statistical manual that's the criteria for diagnosing in my field and look up artist healing journey, because it doesn't exist. So the therapist and the client are co-creating, not in that second scenario, not just what's happening in the moment, but the context in which it happens. So the theme A is I'm really badly depressed. Theme B is I'm in the middle of a artist healing journey. It's two different ways to see essentially the same thing. One is very medicalized. You got to go to the doctor, got to get your cocktail of serotonin, reuptake inhibitors, etc. And again, nothing wrong with that. I mean, that can work. I've seen that work for a lot of people, and that's helpful. Or you got to do your intensive cognitive behavioral therapy where you get into your brain and try to spot all these irrational thoughts that are creating your depression. Part B over here for that particular individual, because it is based on a particular individual, is a new theme of, hey, you're an artist, you're creative. Let's try new ways to be creative, because that's the problem. There's nothing wrong with you. You're blocked from your creativity. So let's do some things that allow that creativity to flow. So self-knowledge is the ability to, like you say, to allow that unknown to come forth. And instead of thinking you got it figured all out, because just because your client says they're depressed or anxious doesn't mean that you have to accept their theme. Or if you do accept their theme, then you can maybe transform the theme of therapy. So rather than every session of a therapy, depressed. I get depressed thinking about that many therapy sessions where I'm, looking at the theme of what's going on in that person's life. What resource do they need? What strength haven't they activated? What creative new experience can they come up with to shift their somatic feelings? A lot different than, okay, well, here's the standard evidence-based treatment, and we got to do the diagnostics and all of that. Again, the whole field can be very effective. But I think it's also, if it gets too medicalized, then it can be very rigid. Now, there are some people throughout the history of the field who were very creative, like Carl Jung, who I think him less as a psychiatrist and more as a mystic and more of a hermetic philosopher. And so he's investigating and trying to work with people with all these really creative ways. And he's quoted one time as saying, "Thank God I'm not a Jungian." And he's like, "But you're Carl Jung." And he's like, because he didn't want to get even his own ideas didn't want to get rigid and stuck in this theme that everyone has to enter into. And if they don't occupy the theme the way the therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, doctor, whoever thinks they should, then there's something wrong with the client. Whereas maybe the theme is not a good theme for the person. So if I see someone and I think their problem is a chemical imbalance, I've created a theme. If I think their problem is problems in their thinking, like cognitive distortions, I've created a theme. If I think it's because their childhood issues with their cold, unfeeling mother, I've created a theme. Because you know what? We can find that for most of this, there's no clear-cut 100% evidence that A equals B. We're creating themes to work out of. And if we get too rigid on a theme, as I know it's got to be your childhood, or I know it's got to be your chemicals, or I know, then we lock out the possibility of any other information getting in or even discussed. So then we're locked inside a frame of just this theme, and you get more of the same. One of my mentors said, you can never have enough of what you don't want, you know?
I love all those quotes. You're the best at that. Oh. They're so funny. I have a quote because it makes me think of this. It's a famous Krishnamurti quote, which, although the way we know it, it's apparently not exactly what he was saying, but it's basically that to be well, you've heard it and everyone's heard it. To be well adjusted to a sick society is not a measure of health or whatever you want it.
Right.
I don't know how it was exactly, but so to create those themes we're talking about, you need to have a model of what what the self, I was going to say, is, but also what it should be, basically. So there's no freedom to determine what this self should act like and should what makes it normal and functioning, and I don't know, like for me, like it's pretty obvious that if you look out there and in those machines, it's not going so well, so like adjusting to that, really, that's what you want, Mm-hmm. So it has to be a challenge for the therapist to just imagine if I had to make such decisions, like to build those themes, like, mm-hmm. You got to be a bit of a mystic to allow it to just come out of the person, like what it's in the client, I guess. Mm-hmm. What their best version of them can be. It's in there. It's not in here in my head, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So
just asking your client, whether you're a therapist, you're a coach, or whatever, what do they want? It's like, okay, mm-hmm. I want to be happy. Okay, so define what that is. Yeah. And then why do you want that? So getting through these layers, because a lot of times what people think they want, they really don't want. It's some socially constructed nonsense. But a lot of times what they want is really what they do want. And they've kind of blocked themselves, or things in life have happened that kind of keep them from constructing life the way they think it is. Reality, there's two ways to view reality for me. There's one that's called fundamental reality. Now, fundamental reality are things like gravity. Now, if I take a pin and I drop it, no matter how many times I drop it, that's going to happen, at least in this world that we're living in. That's fundamental reality. We can argue over how fast it drops, what kind of pin I'm using to drop every time. But if we intellectually are honest, no one can say that gravity doesn't exist, because it's going to happen every time. I can't have any information or facts to know that what I'm feeling when I'm dropping the pin. I only know what I'm feeling. If you drop the pin, I can't know for sure what you're feeling. You can tell me, but I don't know if you're really being honest with me. Maybe the way you're viewing the way the pen does, you create a story in your head about pens, and I don't know. And then we construct a reality about the process. So the fundamental world we live in, I think for most people, that's not open to a lot of debate. But this idea that we're constructing reality, and what I mean is our perception of reality, the way the context that we view our lives is a construction of what we have come up with based on patterns of interaction we've done previously. I mean, you look at it this way. You got one person who's had a really horrible childhood, grew up with a lot of abuse, neglect, and everything like that, and then they are 30 years old. And they say, I've had a horrible childhood, and that means, and then you fill in the blank. And, person A who went through this horrible thing may say, I've had a horrible childhood, and that means I'll never trust people. I've had a horrible childhood, and that means I'm going to probably be bad to my kids. I've had a horrible childhood, and that means I'm always going to be afraid. I've had a horrible childhood, and that means I can't handle life. And then you got person B who's had a horrible childhood, and they said, I've had a horrible childhood, and that means that I know I'm stronger. I lived through it. I can do a lot of things. I know how not to treat people. I know that going through that gave me insight so that I'm going to treat my family even better. So it's not the fundamental reality is both of these people, they had a horrible childhood, right? They're abused, neglected, or anything. But the part of the sentence, and that means, fill in the blank, whatever that means, that's a constructed reality. The problem is that we forget that there's we think both of those. I had a horrible childhood, fundamental, and that means, and we think that's fundamental instead of that we've also kind of constructed a way of seeing that fundamental. And then we start to live our lives as if the construction that we did to create this context for our lives is a real thing. And only when we step back and say, hey, do I really know what I know? Question our own epistemology about our own lives and go, wow, just because my wife ran off with the pool boy and left me, maybe I'm not a horrible person like I have been living my life the last 5 years about. Or maybe I am. I don't know. But just to that ability to step back and look at that greater meaning that we've assigned this reality that we construct about how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about the world. And that's why a lot of times we do want to talk to therapists or coaches or preachers or teachers, because they can sit back because it's not their life and go, hey, this part here, I don't think that's always true. Have you considered that it may be something else? We make a distinction about the world. And when we make a distinction, we assume that the distinction we made is a reality, but we've just constructed that. And the way a lot of times when you go and you talk to somebody, they just make a new distinction. Hey, guess what? Your wife just may have been a real horrible person and just likes pool boys and ran off. Might not have anything to do with you. Or maybe she's crazy. Or maybe the marriage was on its way out and she gave you the opportunity to get out by her actions. And maybe she should be appreciated more than, hated or, all this. Whatever the distinction is or the redistinction. But in order for us to make a distinction, we have to start with this premise that this is not that. So we say this and not this. And then we've created a dividing line between two things, not realizing that we're the ones who's creating that. There is no, dividing separation, if you will. It's we're the ones who's creating that. You used this word earlier. You said how we should be. And that should is the term should is a wonderful term to let us know that society and culture or whoever wants us to do something different than what we want to do. Because when you say he should have done this, she should have done that, it's like we've already had this, like you say, this predestined way of how we think people need to be living their life. And when they don't, somehow they failed or they haven't, as opposed to looking at that as in, was it the teacher Byron Katie says, if it should have been, it would have been. And looking at not at this constructed reality in the world of shoulds, but hey, just get back to the fundamental. What happened? What happened? And focus on the fundamental reality of what happened. And then realize that you have the ability, like a mind magician, if I can throw that term out, to say, okay, how do I want to feel about this? How do I want to view this differently? Am I viewing this and making a distinction about these things based on what's really happening or based on my conditioning, how I was brought up, where I live, my culture, God forbid, the media, all these other sources that daily are trying to get in our heads to make us feel like we're just a bunch of monkeys and need to buy more things to be happy and, run ourselves into debt and then feel so unfulfilled that you got to pick up the phone and call someone like me, So a little bit of a long-winded tirade there, but it comes down to, if you're looking at these things, we forget that we're simultaneously experiencing the very thing that we're creating. as we're doing it, we're also creating.
Well, you mentioned something that's, to me, that's the crux of mysticism, and I want to make clear. I think I've said it again. I've said it before, but mysticism to me is not occultism at all, and all you've mentioned to me is required for an effective. I'm using quotes here because that's a strange word, but for an effective walking of this mystical path, this ability that you've mentioned of stepping back and looking at things kind of in a controlled, dissociative way. Like, okay, this dude there called Dominic has been going through this and now he feels that, but what does he truly believe, you know? And that's kind of my thing, you know, because well, I said mysticism doesn't mean occultism, but sometimes it does, because, you know, like just the interest of, and even you've been interested, at least as a spectator, or if I see the books you've written, but and something that's related to, well, it's pretty popular, so I don't know if I should put it in occultism, but this idea of the law of attraction and how people want to create things in their lives, you know, with some, well, I think there's some truth to that, and it comes with the placebo effect, and maybe there's some metaphysical interactions also, I don't know. But still, how do you even know what you want to create? Like, most people don't know themselves truly, you know? So why would you, like, it's kind of, wanting to go for a drive without knowing how to drive, you know, basically.
Right. Yeah. And then,
I don't know. And we
if you're driving too,
go ahead.
If you already know how to drive, sometimes it's nice to just kind of ramble around and see what's out there and not know where you're going. But at the same time, if you did that every day when you needed to go to work, hey, it's 9:00. I'm supposed to be at the office. How did I end up in Denver? You know, kind of a recipe for failure on some level. You know,
pretty much, yeah. That brings me to another question I had concerning pain, because you've mentioned depression and all like anxiety, and they're all in a way forms of pain. And I was asking because I have some friends who are in or more in like they're physical therapists. Sorry, my first language is French, so by the way, that's why sometimes just
okay, cool.
And I asked them, I have an osteopath friend, I have a friend who's a personal trainer. How do you know the difference with between pain that's kind of normal because it's part of the transformation, and pain that is actually, I was going to say destructive, but pain is always destructive. Yeah. Although sometimes it's just a cycle of destruction, and sometimes it's just to grow something a bit bigger and more evolved. So how can one, before they go and call you, you know, distinguish between the kind of pain that's it's basically it's just normal? Mm-hmm. It's kind of a tricky question. I don't know if because even my friends who are in more physical stuff, they didn't really know how to answer. You know, like, how can you tell? Mm-hmm. How am I? You know,
right. I usually answer a question like this, at least for me in my field, because I won't speak to the, physical therapy or the, excuse me, the more physical healing arts. But I call it the 3 Ds. For someone to really know that it's too much, there's got to be generally a high level of distress, daily distress. That's our first D. The second D is dysfunction, meaning that the things that they normally would have no trouble doing, they're not able to function. Right? And the third D is deviance, and not deviant with a T. Deviance is in like a statistical measurement. So if you're so far out of the norm, of your norm, that it's kind of adding to that distress and the deviance, then that's something that you may want to look at. So, for example, laying in bed. We all hopefully get to lie in bed, for several hours a day, because we need that. But now, if it's 2 days and you haven't gotten out of bed, that's so out of the norm that it's obviously going to be causing dysfunction with going to work and distress, and then there's a whole bunch of physiological things from not moving. So for me, the 3 areas is a distress, dysfunction, and deviance. And if that person is experiencing all 3 of those, then, it's definitely, I would call that a painful experience, because we're all going to have distress. We're all going to have some level of dysfunction here or there, and we're going to do things sometimes that are out of the norm, our individual norm. And but if it's consistent enough, all working together, then that's usually a sign you may want to, get some help in whatever avenue that you feel that's appropriate for you. For some people, maybe I go to my doctor and ask about medication. For others, it's I need to go talk to a shrink. Others, it may be I go talk to my rabbi or my priest or, whoever, preacher, that kind of thing. But that's how I would define it. Now, I want to circle back, if it's okay, about to the quote we were talking about Krishnamurti and about how our society and culture trying to adjust to that.
Yeah.
Well, that's some issues, because you think about in our culture, Western culture, how things are changing so rapidly. I mean, my goodness, I really read something the other day that several just words that we use in daily life, suddenly they're not acceptable anymore. And just like at the drop of a hat. Well, that's a lot to keep up with. So if you're trying, okay, the language is changing so quick, technology is changing so quick. If you're having trouble acclimating to a culture, society that's moving so fast, coming up with so many new rules, so many new ideas, so many things, it's no wonder that people are feeling depressed and anxious in general. Or your culture is focused on obtaining more things. That's the primary focus. You're not a success unless you live in a 10,000 square foot building with 15 cars and your net worth $10 million. That kind of thing. That all sounds nice, particularly the $10 million. That all sounds nice and nothing wrong with that. But when that becomes kind of the mental template that you take on, and at heart you're a poet who's okay living like Thoreau in a cabin in the woods, and now you beat yourself up because you're distressed because I should be further along here's that should again, doing things that other people are doing, that can lead to distress and dysfunction and some deviance from the norm. So I think we need to be clear on what's our personal thing we're dealing with, and what is the environment creating, what's our culture and society creating. I mean, my brother told me the other day he's watched some video with some guy who was up lecturing young men about money, and he says, if you're not a man unless you're making at least $400,000 a year, and strutting around on the stage. And I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, that's the way. But if those are the messages that you buy into, no wonder you feel horrible about yourself. I guess, I don't want to sound like I'm on a soapbox, but I think we need to be aware of what's happening in our world. How does that affect us? Not just the wars and the nonsense politics. Those are always going to be there, by the way. If you look throughout history, we're always going to have those. But how do those things affect me personally? Are these cultural, social ideas that I want to take on? Me personally, I'm kind of trying to live a more a simple life. A lot of people want to live a big. I'm actually trying to live a smaller life just because it brings me more contentment, more happiness, and my God, is it easier to manage? So when we're saying what's pain, is pain an outside coming in or an inside coming out, or is there just a loop that continues to flow through until people learn to think differently, act differently, that's in accordance to their highest values, their highest priorities? I'll tell you, my friend, if people could just get in touch with what's really, truly important to them and be clear on that, a lot of this stuff would go away. People would stop working jobs they hate. They'd stop being in relationships that drain them. They'd stop getting involved in the drama of celebrity and politics. They'd start trying to figure what's really important to me. So if what's important to me, hypothetically, is making pottery, that's something that I really value, then I'm not going to try to go put on a suit and go be a hedge fund manager. I'm just going to have to find a way to get through to where I can do my pottery, and hopefully success comes out. But I'm happier, So some people's highest value, highest priority in life is taking care and raising their children. So rather than trying to society force them out into the workplace to do these kind of things to where they're never home, because they're doing it for the good of the kids, maybe you just need to be a stay-at-home mom, a stay-at-home dad, and maybe your partner likes doing something else, and it's trying to not live beyond your means, trying to just create. Here goes back to the whole thing, constructing reality, creating your daily reality that matches who you really are in your highest priority, your highest value in life. And I think so many people are just disconnected from it. I mean, if your highest ideal for yourself does not match what society tells you, it is a struggle. And in some cases, it can lead to a pathological way of feeling, and that's tough.
Yeah, clearly, and that notion of success for me, actually was very central to finding my my inner stability. Although I like to remain flexible, but and like really, really wrestling with that idea. What is success to me? And the answers I found, like whenever I tell people, most like really, that's it. Like that's what drives you. Like to me, it's integrity, and that's it. That's just it. Just trying to do. I wish I had some grandiose way of saying it, but just try to do the best that you can. Just focus on that and what feels right and natural. It's that simple. And to me, that's why, like, I use this term mysticism, but I see it around me in very normal people. Like as you said, like for some people, just being at home and raising their kids. I've seen that when I was doing jobs that I personally didn't like. I saw people that were okay with doing that because to them, the most meaningful thing in their lives was at home with just their kids and their wives or husbands or partners, and that's the deepest, most truest experience for them, and that's what gives them like a natural energy for doing things in life. I needed different things, but it's anyway. So but it brings me to sorry, maybe you had a
I was just going to say, it comes down to this idea of people kind of an unfolding. The Jungian psychologist, the late James Hillman, wrote a book. I think, wish I could remember the title of it, but he attributed each of us to having an acorn, and that acorn, develops into a tree. But the acorn that we're having, a lot of times we don't water it, we don't care for it because somehow we think that we should be doing something else or being someone else. And so that's where a lot of the internal struggles come in, to where, hey, I just want to go ride horses and work on a ranch, and there might not be a lot of big fame and fortune in it. And so, but my dad will think I haven't measured up to all these things we think in our head. And so instead of going out and riding horses on a ranch where I can live a very productive, happy life, I go, like I say, be the hedge fund manager, or go become a lawyer or an accountant. And you know what? There's plenty of people whose acorn is an accountant, is a hedge fund manager, is an attorney. So let those acorns open, and your acorn about riding horses on a ranch, that needs to open. It's like somehow we measure our lives based on our income, based on the job title. I mean, crying out loud, when I started college back in the dark ages, it was there's some you get a degree and you go and you get work, but there was some element of learning, of becoming a well-rounded person, a scholar, and then you go and you use for whatever you want to do. Now it's about, well, don't get that English literature degree because you're not going to be able to get a good job with that. So it's shifted from being educated now in a lot of ways to being trained. So go to positions, even though that's not your acorn, to where you can support yourself and your family. And I get it. I get it with the realities of economics. But at the same time, if somewhere that acorn isn't being cared for, it's going to rot and die, taking you with it. So if you decide, I'm okay, I can do accounting, it's not my passion, I love English literature, well, go be the accountant. But then in your part-time, go teach English, at the college as an adjunct teacher, or write, or do things that you want, so that you can somehow balance those things out. But I just feel that this kind of an ontological, our ground of being, oftentimes gets dictated by, again, the society, the culture, what's important to us. Why is it that someone who's a medical doctor seems to get so much more praise than somebody who's a superb plumber? Because, they're a doctor, they save lives, and that's absolutely true. But when the doctor goes down to his or her basement and the water's up to their knees, they're not going to call a doctor. Suddenly, the most important person in the world is the plumber. So, we get into these kind of, divisions as in a hierarchy. Whereas, yes, okay, the doctor is, she's helping people and health and all that. But guess what? The plumber is also helping people, just in a different way. And I think if people kind of have more of that, again, going back to self-knowledge, what is it that's most important to me? What is my acorn? Yeah. How do I allow that to come forward? And maybe I don't have to do it for a job. Maybe I can do the accounting job and it's fine, but also the accounting job gives me the money to do the other thing. Maybe I want to stay home with the kids, and maybe I can do more work at home, and then I can be with whatever it is, To be honest, Dominic, I don't know how I got on this topic, but I just felt like I needed to say it.
You know what? Like I thought recently, like it's as I was telling you, this is only my 6th interview, so I'm very, very new. I'm a quick learner though, but and I was thinking to feel a bit more at ease. I should not rely too much on my questions. And I thought of a lot of what you were saying about therapy and being creative, and that means being in the moment also. So I'm already learning from this experience, because I don't know exactly where I was, and I've asked you maybe 4 questions out of I don't know how many, and we're already an hour in. So it's all good. It's that flow that we're looking for, and this is something I'm learning about podcasting. That said, I want to. It's not even in my questions, but I just want to point something out for people listening to this. Not that I think I have something to teach people, but it's something that I realized was really important to me. This thing about self-knowledge, the importance of being totally honest with ourselves, with this notion, is so important. And it goes because you gave examples like, being a doctor is better than being a plumber and things like that. But we have those, and a lot of those ideas come from society, or sometimes the family nucleus, but sometimes they come from ourselves too. And why I'm saying this is because some years ago, kind of recently, I put the Dominic as a musician to rest. I still have my gear, and I still love making music. When there's music in these shows, it's always the music that I made. But I constructed this reality that I don't care if I'm poor, and I don't care if I have to sacrifice everything to get there. So, and it seems more noble, for someone who's going against the grain and against, I don't need money, but I had to really, really struggle with that idea. Are you sure? Are you sure? Again, Byron Katie, she's a lot of, what is it that she's saying a lot? And is that true? Yeah. And the work. Mm-hmm. Is it true that you want to be a musician? And I realized when I want to be a musician, I hate making music. It's not fun. I've never had fun. I've never been productive in music. I've never had a satisfying degree of interaction with the public, and it's not for me. It took me 40 years to realize that. So to question those ideas for ourselves, it's so important. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we need someone to put that mirror in our face. My therapist has been very important in that process for me, although we didn't address that specifically, but just I discovered with her in the last few years. She's retired now. Sorry, I'm rambling a little. Okay. That's when I'm excited. She helped me with this process of exploring oneself. And I don't know, this is popping just right now because you're doing hypnosis also, right? I don't know where I'm going with this, but let's go. What worked with me is, I don't know how similar to hypnosis it is, but it was EMI. I have it written. It's not. It's the movement. Eye movement integration. Eye movement integration. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was huge for me, and it felt in many ways kind of even like magic or shamanistic in a way, but to help me with that process of just stepping out and seeing what's alive in me, in my psyche, in my emotions, that was instrumental. I don't know if you've noticed people in your practice learning to see themselves. Where am I going with this? Maybe you have some things to say already. You're inspired with hypnosis.
Well, one thing I do want to say, going back to the idea about you being a musician, the idea that that's who you needed to be for a while. I think sometimes we get so stuck on this idea that my identity has to be X. Oh, I've arrived. I've become a musician or a psychotherapist or an author or a doctor or a plumber, whatever, and that we're supposed to always have that. So the truth is, I'm conjecturing here, is that for a short period of time or a longer period of time, being a musician was necessary and it was important. And that's exactly what you were in a certain way. And so now time has changed. So maybe you're no longer a musician in the same way. But why is that generally looked on as in, oh, well, you're supposed to be this thing the whole time? I have never met anybody that interesting who has only done one thing. Most of the most interesting people have done multiple things. I've had tons of experiences, I mean, maybe Mick Jagger's acorn is music and performing. So, he's 80 years old and still out there killing it every night. He's a phenom. Some of us don't want to be going, how many great rock musicians from the 60s and 70s have retired, just physically they're tired, or they just got burned down and look, I don't want to do this anymore. And there's nothing wrong with that. So that acorn may felt like, music for a while, but that also led you to certain other things and here we are today. Yeah. So I just want to kind of comment that maybe being an accountant is what someone needs to do for 5 to 10 or 15 or 20 years. And then one day to say, oh, I shouldn't have done that is kind of denying reality. No, you probably absolutely needed to do that to learn things. And it's okay to do something different and not have your identity as is I'm an accountant or a musician. And so hypnosis, see how I did that, brought it back around? Yeah. Hypnosis is what we often do to ourselves, is in we hypnotize ourselves thinking somehow that we're not changing.
Yeah.
And we get into a trance that we're supposed to always be the same. And I don't know about you, but at my age now, when I look at the back of my head, there's less hair there. There's more gray here. I'm physically changing. Why would I not also emotionally change, mentally change? I went through a time period where I thought I wanted to do a certain thing, and I invested a lot of time, effort, money, stress, work, and I'm proud of what I did. But I got to that point and I realized, hey, I'm here. I don't really want to do this. I don't really want to be that guy. And there's part of me that got down about it, but there's other part of me is like, well, maybe I was supposed to be that guy till right now. And that every time, again, it goes back to the constructing of reality, I'm constructing a new version of me. As our mutual friend Jeff Mishlove says, always creating the best version of ourselves. And maybe that version of myself had to be built upon some of these challenges, some of these successes, some of these out-and-out failures. And we get hypnotized into thinking that, oh, I should be the way I was when I'm 25, 35, 45, 55, as opposed to every day I'm this acorn opening up, this dynamic interacting with my environment. And I can create and do all kinds of things, but I need to do things that are, here's the self-knowledge, that align with who I am, my priorities and values. So, I totally get where you're coming from about the musician, but that served you up to now, and it will continue to serve you, but in a different way.
Oh, I can already see how it's serving me now. By the way, like my experience as a musician helps me to do this right now, because I also have a good ability to step out and, for example, and I'm saying that not just to talk about myself, but because sometimes it feels like my experience is kind of singular. My life experience is kind of weird. And when I look around, so I'm like, maybe I should suggest things, and like for this idea of when you do something, you really have to put all in it and have success in mind, It's really weird for me. In many ways, it works completely the opposite. And this is what I've learned in music. When I was doing shows in front of people, whenever I had an idea, I'm going to try to reach them through this way or whatever, worst shows. every time. And whenever I remember one particular show when we had trouble with the organizer and we didn't want to do it, and it was at a venue where a lot of huge bands that I loved at the time, Smashing Pumpkins, Nirvana, like they all had played there when they were smaller bands. And me and my friend at the time in that band, we thought, like we're just gonna do it just to say we've played there, So we didn't care. We were there for the music and for just us. Actually, we didn't care about the audience. Best show ever. Like, people came to us afterwards like, that was amazing, so that's what I learned. I have to not care. And for some people it's going to be the opposite.
Right. They
have to have a plan. That's how they're built. To me, it's that just it works when I don't care.
Right.
It seems counterintuitive. So and it's all connected with this idea of meaning and nature. I love this acorn analogy, and I often use plants and trees when it comes to the mystic path.
And by the way, I just remembered
because
I just remembered the name of the book.
Ahead.
I think it's called The Soul's Code by James Hillman, where I got that metaphor from. So if anyone's interested, that's where I got it from.
Cool. It's going to be, by the way, so just so people know, and there's going to be show notes that are going to be as detailed as possible. So I'll find a link to that book. It's going to be in there. So yeah, I love that analogy, and it's all connected to meaning. And I don't know if you know of Johan Hari, who's done a lot of work on depression. He was a pretty well-known guy because of TED Talk. I think that was really popular. I think at one time he was on the Joe Rogan show, which is very big. So, and he connected depression in society, basically like on a larger scale, to the lack of this crisis of meaning that we have, the lack of meaning, and. I wrote a little about that in my book. And do you know that experience of the Rat Park experience, Bruce K. Alexander? Because we have this. I don't even know exactly where it comes from, but those rats that would have morphine water, and they would just drink and just. Basically get stoned until they die. Right. And they would choose the morphine rather than the normal water. But not to go too long on it, but the Rat Park experience, Bruce K. Alexander he's a Canadian scientist. And the experience was, it doesn't really make sense to put the rats in such austere environments. For sure they're gonna choose the morphine, just as we choose the entertainment, and we prefer Netflix to self-knowledge, basically. And he redid the experiment, but with rat parks, where they had everything to be happy. And for sure, they didn't choose the drug water as much as they did so sometimes for fun, apparently. But so that idea of meaning, it's so mysterious and it's hard to grasp. Do you have a conception of meaning that you're working with, a model of meaning?
Well, I think it goes back to the idea of the constructed reality, because things matter and mean to us what we intellectually lock onto, and a lot of times what we somatically feel. You hear a lot of times people say, that just feels right to me. Even if logically maybe it didn't make sense, but they follow that path, and then it sometimes works out, sometimes doesn't. But yet that idea that there's an intuitive, unconscious gut feeling. And so what's meaningful to you is going to be different from me and from anyone else. In a clinical setting, it's more important to me to understand what's meaningful to the client, and also how they created that as being meaningful. So if somebody says having a lot of money is very meaningful to me because it gives me power, and you delve a little deeper, and it's basically it helps me feel less afraid. So really what's driving them is not the meaning of the money, it's the meaning to feel less afraid, to feel brave, or some things like that. So as far as a societal meaning, I mean, we have changed so much. And again, this goes back to my comment earlier, things changing so quickly. I mean, in my father's time period, I mean, most men went into the military for 2 to 4 years. I mean, that was, you're conscripted into the military. And now, thankfully, that's not the case. But what it gave men in some ways is a structure and a kind of a rite of passage. And I see a lot of what we're trying to do as a culture, particularly younger people who I've actually, even though I get frustrated being the older guy with a lot of the younger people, I mean, that's a stereotypical thing. I actually have a lot of empathy because things are changing. They don't have a solid foundation to figure out what's meaningful and what's not. Part of throwing away the old system to create something better is that you have to really know what the old system is. You really got to get in and look at it. It's like the whole baby in the bathwater kind of thing. And because we don't have those rites of passage like we used to, we don't have a lot of the rituals culturally that maybe some indigenous cultures have, a sense of community. I mean, crying out loud, we all live. I mean, I live in a great neighborhood. I don't know my neighbors. I mean, I do, but, say hi and all, but I don't know much about them. They don't know much about me. It's not that I dislike people. It's just we all as a culture tend to have done this, even though things like this, internet, you think we'd be closer. But the truth of the matter is we're getting less connected, and less connection requires people to go inside and desperately try to find an individual meaning without a collective meaning. So these two, it's like a Venn diagram, that the collective world and then the individual. Now, I'm not saying there's one specific way for everybody, because I don't believe that. But if we want to have a meaning in our life, we have to create some of it. If we don't feel like we can create a meaning that's important to us, we will oftentimes jump to different groups that give us a sense of belonging, a sense of meaning. I mean, now we got the far left, the far right, all these, people who just feel lost in the world, particularly young people, and they're jumping ship to go into some of these groups, religious groups, cultural groups, all of that, and to try to find some meaning. And then you create an identity based around this collective idea. And then when someone comes along and challenges it, then you get upset because, you're not just saying what I have been doing is incorrect. You're saying that I'm, as a human being, incorrect because my identity is based on all these exterior organizations or groups or ideals that maybe didn't really give me that sense of meaning, but I really wanted the sense of connection. So it's a hard question to answer because I personally don't think all of our depression is caused by a lack of meaning, but I think a good chunk of it may indeed be. When we don't have that, we all feel lost. I mean, Viktor Frankl did a whole type of psychotherapy, logotherapy, about helping people find meaning, because when he felt that people, based on his experiences in the concentration camps in Auschwitz III in World War II, he felt that people who didn't have meaning tended to die earlier, almost like give up. But the people who had a more important long-term vision, a meaningful vision for themselves, tend to hold on longer. So it is definitely, I think, an element of truth there. But then each person, I believe, each person's meaning is going to be slightly different. And this is one thing I want to point out. It is essential in our world for people to have different meanings, to have different viewpoints. Because if you look at things kind of from a Taoist perspective, which I kind of lean towards sometimes, that's your yin and yang. If you're going to have a far right, you got to have a far left. Yeah. And you got to have somebody in the middle, because that tears our balance. At the same time, if you have a really great idea, there's going to be somebody come along and thinks it's a dumb idea. And if you got a really dumb idea, eventually somebody's going to run to you and say, hey, that's a great idea. And our inability to see how all factions kind of work together to create a whole keeps us separated and in this constant struggle trying to convince side A to be more like side B, but side B absolutely has to have side A in order to exist. And so that's why we pull our hair out. We feel like, what's wrong with these people? It's like you have to have groups that you disagree with. You have to have groups, family members that drive you nuts. At the same time, you have people that you do agree with, family members that are supportive, jobs that are great, jobs that are horrible. Because if we're making the distinction in order to say reality is a certain way, we have to say what it's also not. We can't have something without not experiencing the opposite. It's like these clients I get who come in and tell me they've never been happy. I'm like, come on, that's not true, because how would you know you're not happy unless you've experienced happy to know you're not? Maybe this is as good as it gets. I don't know. But that kind of unbalanced perception of our world oftentimes stand in the way of us creating the meanings that we may need to enjoy our lives, to be successful in our own ways, in a manner that helps, like I said, going back to the acorn, to emerge.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, I love it. I love it, Paul. That's so good. Listen, we have to wrap up. We're getting close to, and it's a great place to stop. I've shared with you a little of where I was trying to take things, and that there's more paranormal things that I was curious to talk with you about. We didn't get into that, and that's quite okay, because I think it was important what we talked about today. It's very central to the even if I try to keep my channels feel towards the mystical path, we often forget the psychological aspects of that, and that was great. Paul.
I'm good.
Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure.
All right, so 9 books so far. Is there something you're working on now?
Actually, no. For once, I'm not working on a book, and I wrote 9 books in 9 years, and I figure this 10th year I just need to take a break, and so we'll see. I say that, and then next month I'm back at it. But as of now, nothing going on. If people are interested in my books, feel free to go to my website, which is www.drpaullesley.com. That's DRPAULLESLIE.com. Has my books there, information on trainings I do. I do a lot of trainings for mental health professionals, and sometimes coaching and things like that for folks outside mental health. And the book writing bug, I think we're taking a little break and kind of reassessing, but I'm proud of some of the books I've written, and if somebody finds some value in them, I'm always very, very pleased.
Great. If you're up for it, maybe we can get into some of these more specifically one day. I'd sure love to have you back on again.
Oh, thank you so much. I would love it.
Great. Well, thanks again, Paul. Dr. Paul J. Lesley. People, check him out. You can do a little search on YouTube. Also, a lot of interviews, very interesting, with Paul. Check it out. And thank you once again for being there. And thanks for everyone for listening. I hope that you got as much light as I did from it. All right. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks.
So you've made it to the end of this Hopscotch Chronicles podcast episode, and I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed doing it. And I thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you're benefiting in a way or another from this conversation. So if you'd like to follow my work, whether on this podcast or my personal work, you can go to Twitter or X and follow me at Domi_Vallée, DOMI_Vallée. Same username for Instagram if you prefer that platform. You can also go to the official website for the podcast, which is hopscotchchronicles.com. And if you'd like to support the podcast as well as my personal work, you can do so by subscribing to my Patreon. The address is patreon.com/Dominique Vallée, DOMINIC Vallée, VALLEE. There you'll find video and audio versions of the episodes without any commercials, as well as special episodes on every Sunday where I take my Sunday afternoon tea with you guys. All right, thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep reaching for the light.